Guys, welcome to the I Love CVille Show. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you kindly for joining us. We are live in Charlottesville, Albemarle County, Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world on the I Love CVille network. Today's show continues the coverage of the coronavirus and how it is impacting Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and Central Virginia. The topics we cover today, just like the topics we covered with two physicians yesterday, not only apply to Charlottesville and Central Virginia, but they're trends and discussions that are happening in communities across the world. Yesterday, we had doctors from 4 different countries jumping in on the stream. Today, we have Lloyd Snook, Charlottesville City Councilor, kind enough to join us. We'll welcome him in T-minus 20 seconds to the show. Judah, I'm going to go straight to the guests here in about 20 seconds, just to give you a heads up. He's our director, Judah Wickhauer. We're going to talk policy and strategy and infrastructure. And today, tomorrow, and then I think 6 months, 18 months, 24 months. From now. City Council is right in the middle of their budget, creating their budget, and we have significant loss in that budget from a revenue standpoint. Just consider the meals tax. Consider the tourism, what's happening with lodging. Let's welcome Lloyd Snook to the show. Judah, studio camera, then two-shot. Thank you for joining us, Lloyd.
Happy to be here. Sorry for the occasion.
We're grateful that you are allocating your most precious commodity, your time, to helping the community. Open-ended question, where do we stand today?
Well, the first news, I guess, today is that there are now 3 additional reported COVID-19 cases in the Charlottesville-Albemarle area. There was a press release from the Thomas Jefferson Health District this morning that basically spells out what little they're able to tell us. All they're really telling us is just the numbers, and continue. Denise Bonds, the health director, Dr. Denise Bonds, continues to talk about the need for social distancing, stay home if you're sick, avoid contact with sick people, et cetera. So the real news is we went from 1 now to 4 confirmed cases in this area. And I think we have to be realistic that the pandemic, is coming here. And we knew it would, but a lot of people have been trying to say, oh no, it's not gonna come here, it's not gonna be anything we have to worry about. Got news for you, folks, it's here.
Herb Porter says, howdy, guys, stay safe. Russ Haley, he says he's listening. Matthew Carter says he's listening. Give it a like, give it a share. Planning Commissioner Rory Stolzenberg watching the program. 2 media outlets, NBC 29, CVille Weekly watching the show, and 2 Board of Supervisors in Albemarle County watching the program. I am a positive guy. I'm also a businessman, so I'm a realist when it comes to numbers. Positive Jerry says this. We have 4 cases in Central Virginia and in Charlottesville. That sure beats Washington, New York, etc. That's the positive in me. Is there any solace to that, or is it just time to say, look, half the community is going to get this. Now it's a matter of treating this in stages to help the demand from a hospital infrastructure standpoint?
Well, I think the best analyses from the epidemiologists are that somewhere around 40% of Americans will come down with a case of COVID-19. That doesn't mean that they will all be symptomatic. That's really the place where we start to have trouble from a public policy standpoint, is because the epidemiologists will tell us you've got to act right away, but the political side is the danger is for the people who is caused by the people who are showing no symptoms, who sit there and say, why are you telling me to stay home? I'm not sick. And the reality is, one of the things that they found when they started doing comprehensive testing in Korea, one of the things they found was that the group that was the largest danger to the community were young people who were showing no symptoms. Joan, if you want to pull up the graph that says Korea and young people, we can show a little bit of what we're talking about here.
It's on screen.
Okay. So what this says is, if you look at the graph, the one thing that's important about South Korea is they immediately went to a lot of testing. And basically anybody who wanted to be tested,
Sorry, I'll take that off. Keep going.
Basically, anybody who wanted to be tested could be tested, and so they started getting huge numbers of positive tests. If you look at the graph, it shows a huge number in the age 20 to 29 category. These are the people who, like the UVA students playing in Mad Bowl yesterday that got everybody all upset. They're thinking they're invulnerable. They're thinking they're not going to have a problem with this. The reality is they may not be showing anything, but when they go home, they are shedding viruses like crazy. And so they become the carriers. And this is a little bit different from some kinds of viruses and some kinds of germs, in that the people who are the biggest problems that we're seeing, according to the epidemiologists, I'm not trying to be a doctor here, but the epidemiologists would say the biggest problem is among the people who are showing no symptoms and therefore see no need themselves to act to protect the rest of the community.
Okay, let's talk UVA closing. And we can keep the on-screen graphics coming on. He said he has them all ready. You just have to call them. When you first heard that UVA, this is a lot to unpack here over the last week. First thing I want to unpack is UVA. UVA is 20,000 roughly people that contribute to the economy. When you first heard that students were told to not return, that they would be doing studies online, what went through your mind?
Well, the first issue, of course, has to be, is this medically necessary, epidemiologically necessary? Seems clear. The answer is yes. The second question has to be, okay, how is the city of Charlottesville, now I'm putting on my city councilor hat, how is the city council going to respond to that? The overall problem that Charlottesville has in planning for this is to try to figure out, is this a 2-week emergency? Is it a 2-month emergency? Is it a 6-month or more emergency? We have been given guidance sometimes from Washington, for example. The guidance is, no problem, don't worry about it, it'll all be gone by April. I think we now have a consensus, even at the White House, that that's not accurate. So we're talking about some number of months. Now, there are a couple of scientific studies that have been released or re-emphasized in the last couple of days. The first was out of Imperial College in London, which talked about a 12 to 18-month time frame. Then there was another comment on that came out just in the last day or so, where another epidemiologist was saying, okay, the Imperial College study is correct to a point, but there are 2 reasons why its long-term conclusions are not valid. And his conclusion is that we're probably talking about maybe a 3 to 6 month time period of lockdowns or social distancing or so on. And just to give you a little bit of the reasoning why, the first thing he says is the dire prospects, the 12 to 18 months prospects, assume what's called a transmission rate of 2.4, 2.2, something like that, which is what the early numbers were showing out of Hubei, China. However, what he says is that in most societies, after the first 3 days or so, people don't usually see a whole lot of new people.
Yeah.
I see in my comings and goings, and I've not been in any self-quarantine situation, I probably only interact on a regular basis now with maybe 5 or 10 people a day.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm limiting myself. I'm not going to court. I'm not doing a number of other things. But the point is, you don't have to be on a complete lockdown to drastically reduce that transmission rate. And so he thinks the transmission rate after about 3 days drops to about 1.5, and with any degree of social isolation, it could get down around 1. If it gets down to 1 and below 1, we no longer have an epidemic. And so the question is he right? And mind you, these are all very competent, very capable epidemiologists. Of
course.
I'm not trying to be the guy who makes the decision
Sure.
of which one is right. But if one of them offers me a way forward that doesn't mean we're completely screwed, and one of them offers me a way forward that says we are completely screwed, I'm going to start with the guy who says,
of course,
you've got a way forward where you're not completely screwed. So what I've asked council to do, and I've asked the city management to do, is to come up with a budget projection that assumes, number one, that the university is able to reopen in August.
Okay.
Obviously, we're not going to see UVA.
Best case scenario.
Best case scenario.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
right. And
important to emphasize that.
It is important to emphasize that, and it's certainly not Lloyd Snook, epidemiologist, saying this.
Yeah.
But there is epidemiological evidence out there that suggests that might be an entirely appropriate way to approach it. We will know by the 1st of July whether that's a realistic prospect.
Okay.
We need right now to assume that we will not see any reasonable degree of lodging or meals tax revenue until at least the middle of August.
Safe, yes.
And if that's the case, then we're budgeting $1.6 million a month from those two taxes.
Okay, reiterate that again.
Okay, we are budgeting, based on prior years, we're budgeting in the city $1.6 million a month from lodging taxes and meals taxes. It comes out about $19.6 million between those two, 1.63 or something. So we have to be able to figure, and plus there will be a reduction in the B-poll tax, the business professional occupation license tax that is attributable to those industries. So I've asked them to figure what's it going to look like if we suddenly say we've got $5 million less to spend than we thought we were going to have to spend. Make us a budget that balances minus $5 million.
Jeez.
Then make us, and mind you, the total budget's about $195 million.
Right, close to 200.
So, right.
Yeah.
Then make us a budget that says what happens if it goes another month and we've got now $7 million we've got to make up or to deal with the lack of, and then $9 million. And at some point, we're going to have to try to figure out whether even that is a reasonable scenario. I'm not trying to be the scaremonger here.
No,
I'm trying to be realistic, and I'm trying to plan. Trying to plan both for the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. And there was a moment about a week ago when we were thinking about all of the budget stuff up on the dais at City Council, and I remember Heather Hill said something about whether any of this even makes any sense to be talking about, given what we don't know, but what seems to be about to happen. And as I looked at the numbers more over the weekend, and I realized this is a mess that we have to get in front of. Otherwise, we're going to suddenly look up and say, gee, we've got a $5 million hole and we haven't figured this out.
There is so much I want to unpack with you. Elizabeth Snook, your daughter, says, hi, Dad. I think she's watching in Michigan.
Probably. That's where she works.
Shelby Murphy says, you bring in very clearly, as you always do. Ellie Tucker says, please tell Lloyd I count on him for timely and truthful information. Stay healthy. A lot of folks in City Hall watching in Albemarle County as well from a supervisor standpoint. Throw this to you. Let's talk UVA first. I don't think, and I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer either. I'm just trying to be a realistic person that has a little bit of ability to see down the road. If the University of Virginia, I think Jim Ryan, UVA, the Board of Visitors, people behind UVA, leadership of UVA, undoubtedly wants the health of the community first and the health of the students first. That's safe to say.
Medical health.
Right. We know Jim Ryan and company want that. Secondly, they very much want students to return to grounds, because the longer students are away from grounds and the longer students are learning in their Hanes underwear and pajamas, for lack of better phrasing, the more it marginalizes the real life experience of college, paying that huge tuition, and the more it becomes a realistic scenario that college is just going to be done online in an internet setting, virtual setting. So where I'm going with this is, has anyone even contemplated, and I know you have, but has anyone seriously contemplated what if the students do not return to the University of Virginia?
Well, so
is that realistic?
It's certainly, I think it is a possibility that is not, it's not a 1% chance.
It's more realistic now.
Let's say, just, picking numbers out of various orifices, 25% chance that the school does not reopen in August. or does not reopen physically in August, that the students don't come back. What does that mean? Well, it means a lot. For example, most of the largest payers of property taxes in Charlottesville are the folks who own student apartments. They are obviously not going to get revenue, although they will still be taxed.
Yeah, right.
and that's always a very unpleasant conversation to have with somebody, that, hey, you've got to keep paying the taxes because of the income potential of your property,
of course,
when you have, at least in the short run, no income. And so that's a discussion that I really don't want to have. But
what he's basically saying is, if the students don't return in August and they're under lease for all these properties on 14th and Grady, et cetera, and they do not come back and pay monthly rent, the proverbial you-know-what is going to hit the fan,
right,
because those massive property owners will be asked by City Hall to pay taxes, but will have no rent roll coming in to offset that financial exposure.
That's exactly right, and so that's one problem which doesn't affect the city balance, the bottom line yet in the first year, but obviously in the long term. Just to give you an example, I think it was in Farmville recently. Longwood College went to a system where basically all of their students are online, are on campus, on grounds, whatever they call it down there. And so a whole bunch of properties that had been built around the college, around the university, in order to house students, now suddenly they're vacant. They are suddenly valueless, or at least almost valueless. And so they are going to the city government in Farmville, town government in Farmville, saying, you've got to cut our assessments because we've now had our market taken away from us. These properties are not worth what they were 3 years ago or 5 years ago. Cut these assessments, which means, and of course, if they went to court, they would eventually win some kind of diminution in that respect.
Of course.
And so Farmville ends up losing. Now, we're looking at that here potentially a couple of years down the road, if in fact the market for students living off grounds becomes very much smaller than it is right now. The notion of putting all the students on grounds is not a complete joy for everybody.
Of course.
There's some real problems.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have invested a lot of money.
So when Jim Ryan says put second years on grounds, you have the MSCs of the world freaking out.
Right. And MSC, I think, was the group that lost a big chunk of money down in Farmville over this.
Yeah.
So now I still think, on balance, putting more students on grounds is going to help everybody in the community, and MSC and the other companies will adapt. Unless we end up with this huge paradigm shift where now all of a sudden people say, why should I even literally come to Charlottesville for my college experience? What's it gaining me? Is there an alternative? Are there other ways to do this? And one of the things that folks at universities and colleges don't want to talk about, if they've got a physical plant, is they don't want to talk about the fact that perhaps the physical plant isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Well, and we'll move on to a different topic, but let's hope to God, as a city that wants to be a world-class city, an innovating city, the hub of tech on the East Coast, that wants to have a strong economy, that the on-grounds experience at the University of Virginia is not marginalized, forgotten, or completely ignored forever.
Absolutely.
Because that means this town is just a run-of-the-mill town in America.
Right. And, about, I don't know, probably 40 years ago, there was a sort of a thought exercise at the Planning Commission's retreat, where Satyendra Ahuja said to everybody on the Planning Commission, okay, I want you to think about this. Supposing the University of Virginia just packed up and moved to Culpeper. What would Charlottesville be like then? How would we want Charlottesville to be moving forward? And everybody looked at him like he was nuts. And nobody had any good answers. And so this is the same sort of situation. What would happen if all of a sudden all of these people, all the students anyway, that's not getting rid of the staff and the faculty, although there would be some change there too. What would happen if the university town was no longer a university town? And we don't have an answer for that. And I hope we don't have to have an answer for that.
I hope to God we don't have an answer for that. Seth Ragausta says, if we get to the point where UVA no longer has a physical plant, we will have a lot of bigger societal issues than where the property taxes went. Ray Cadell has given you props for getting elected and saying that the community elected the right person. We'll move on from UVA. Let's talk restaurants.
Sure.
So much I want to talk about with you. All right, so let's do a kind of a flip book or a timeline, then I'll get out of the way. Coronavirus hits. UVA closes for second semester. Then UVA says no graduation. UVA says online learning until August. And this entire process, restaurants across the city are closing to the point where the governor of Virginia says yesterday, don't be in a group of 10 people or more, which, let's be honest, you can't run a restaurant. If it's 10 people, you just can't. So restaurants closing across the board. I had one of the most prominent restaurateurs in Charlottesville. He asked me not to use his name. Said 20% of the restaurants in Charlottesville city limits will never open again because they're running on such a shoestring budget. Restaurant category, city councilor. Anywhere you want to go.
Well, let's look at what we can do and what we really can't do. The first thing we can't do is to say, okay, you have collected meals tax revenue, but you don't have to turn it over to the city. So the folks who said, as they said last week, okay, we've got this big tax bill due on March 20th. It sure would be nice if we could pay our staff with that instead. I have to tell you, both as a matter of state law and as a matter of local law, and the local law just parrots the state language, so we don't have power to change it, that the law is that tax revenues like that are received in trust, and that you are required to send them on to the city. And in fact, if you don't, you can be guilty of the crime of embezzlement. And it's remarkable that the statute actually recites that you could be guilty of embezzlement under 18.2-111. That's a very unusual thing to put in there. Clearly, they're trying to whack people over the head with the fact that they're
trying to scare tactics.
Don't try to use this as operating money.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, I am confident, because nobody actually escrows the money.
Right.
I'm confident that that money is being used as operating money. What the city has now said is, all right, if you want to take the risk that you're going to end up not being able to pay the taxes, we will give you an amnesty as to penalty and interest, at least for a few months here. And again, this gets back to the question of how long is this going to last? Is it a 2-month thing or a 6-month thing? All of our guidance so far has been built around the notion of 2 months, but I'm confident that we're going to end up having to say it's a longer go than just 2 months. So
I think the earliest they're going to open is August, when the school comes back.
I think that's going to be true for a lot of places.
A lot of play. Okay.
And so the question is, how many people are going to say, all right, this was a marginal business in the first place, I'm out of here.
Especially restaurants. Saturated category.
Right. And, Charlottesville has always had both too many restaurants and not enough restaurants. There are always places opening, always places closing. The flow is sort of a constant thing. My big concern is with the people who have been in business for a long time, who are sort of fixtures, who are sitting there. And if they, for example, if they own the building, they've got a different set of economic problems than if they're renting. If they're renting, maybe they have a landlord who's willing to forgive a couple of months being late. I don't see a lot of banks necessarily being terribly forgiving about that. So you end up with a totally different dynamic. We may end up with restaurants that have been fixtures on the downtown mall, fixtures on the corner, saying, I'm out of here. And certainly they are closing up right now and expect to be closed for months.
So, okay, I literally 45 minutes before the show put out a little take, an analysis, or an approach of suspending the meals tax revenue. There's no doubt in my mind, you're 100% right. We know the restaurant owners are using meals tax revenue that has not been paid to pay their team members or keep the lights on and the doors open. Do what you got to do. You're basically saying we collect this meals tax in the future with the understanding that they will pay on what they owe. They never had this as working capital to begin with, so it shouldn't have been put in cash flow. It should always been escrowed or put to a side. What I'm saying is, wouldn't we want the restaurants, as many of them, to reopen as possible so we can get the meals tax from them in perpetuity or for as long as they're open, as opposed to the short-term meals tax that is owed, it seems like it's stepping over dollars to pick up quarters, that approach.
Well, let me say this: if a business is out of business and not open, it's not selling meals, it's not collecting meals tax, it's not having to pay meals tax. So the notion of suspending meals tax,
Well, it would help with the takeout, and it certainly is going to help if you give them a grace period of 60 days upon reopening dine-in service. So if they dine in, they reopen the restaurant, and for 2 months, 60 days, they don't have to pay the meals tax on that 60-day period. That's more upfront cash to keep the business going.
Are you suggesting that they collect the meals tax and then just pocket it?
No, I'm saying...
Okay, you're saying that they not even collect it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically what you're doing is you're giving to the people walking in the door a 6% discount, so to speak.
Right. And no, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
It's
you just
not
said that well
affecting
said.
the bottom line of the business one penny.
Unless the perception is that the food is more affordable, which is a tough perception to have. I give you that. The alternative is they collect the meals tax, the 6%. They hold on to it for the 60 days, and then the payment doesn't start again until day 61 upon dine-in starting up again. The tough part about that, and I'm going to get out of your way, you're the brains, I'm just the moderator here. The tough part about that is if you don't keep the meals tax coming in, and you're in a sticky freaking spot, dude. If you don't keep the meals tax coming in, then all these other line items are going to suffer in a budget time.
Well, what I've suggested to the city is if we were figuring on 1.6 million a month, and we only get, let's say, a quarter of that. That's obviously $1.2 million a month that we're not receiving, and it's going to be. That's why I get to let's pick a number, $5 million shortfall. I would hope, again, the best case scenario for us is that the university reopens in August. If it reopens in August, then we have all of those meals tax revenues coming back. We have the lodging tax revenues coming back, maybe not 100% right away. I would say looking down the road, a possible problem would be that maybe the football season gets canceled because they don't want the people coming. Congregation of 50,000 people all in one place. And that's going to be a hit for the lodging and meals tax people as well.
So you're thinking that's going to happen?
I think we need to be thinking about it. Oh, man. So again, my best case scenario, which hopefully we will know by July 1, best case scenario is the university reopens on time, tail end of August. I think that even if it reopens at that point, it is still iffy as to whether there would be a sports program. And that's going to be a real hit to the lodging and the hospitality industry.
What do we tell? We have the teachers watching now. They're at home. We have the firefighters watching now. What do we tell the teachers and the firefighters? The firefighters are asking for 1.2, 1.3 for 12 new spots. The teachers, of course, are asking for more money. I mean, do we go ahead and get ahead of this now and say no one is going to get what they're asking for in fiscal year 2021?
What I think we need to do, and I don't have an answer right now as to what's going to happen for 2021. But I do think that we need from City Hall to be looking around and figuring out where we're going to cut $5 million or more. And in some cases, it would be great if there were a line item in the budget for unnecessary expenditures, and we could just pull that out.
Like a savings account.
Well, the point is there is no such line. There's not a line for fraud and abuse.
Buffer.
What we need is somebody's going to have to go through and say, for example, and I'll just use this as one example, something that City Council needs to do itself. There was a lot of fuss over the last year or so about the amount of money that has been spent on City Council travel.
Yeah.
And the fuss has tended to be around the issue of City Council's use, or City Councilors' use of credit cards.
Yeah.
But the real issue for me is what line item is that coming out of? And in fact, City Council last year overspent its travel budget. that's the sort of thing that city council ought to be modeling better behavior for.
Of course.
And instead of budgeting $10,000 and spending $19,000, and in this current fiscal year, the budget I think has been raised to $15,000. We cut that back again, and we do other things when we travel. Just as an example, I went to a conference up in D.C. It was now 10 days ago, the National League of Cities, and so if I had stayed at the hotel, and Sina McGill also went to that same conference, and we drove up together, saving money.
Yeah.
We stayed at my sister's house, instead of probably $2,000 or $2,500 for two hotel rooms and so on. We could have stayed at the hotel. Nobody would have told us no, but we felt we shouldn't. And so, thanks to the hospitality of my sister in Loudoun County, we saved the city $2,500. That's the kind of thing.
Does Lloyd Snook drive in that scenario?
Yeah.
Or do you sit shotgun?
No, I drive.
Okay.
I
All right,
drive.
just check. Okay.
And so she may be the vice mayor, was my car.
Okay.
And so the point is that there are things that we can do at a purely personal level
Sure.
to model better behavior in that respect. And then we can say with a straight face to other city employees and to other people looking in from the outside, look, we're tightening our belts, we're cutting our budget, and let's see if we can't figure out where we can find $10,000 here, $20,000 there, and maybe without even going through, I mean, we've got some reserves. It's not like we're living finely on the margin. We've got a $3 million reserve to cover economic downturns. $3 million isn't going to begin to cover this problem, but It helps. We've got, I think, $17 million in reserves generally. There are some other things we can do, and maybe we end up deciding that some of the year-end expenditures that we had approved back in December and January, maybe we're not going to go ahead with. I don't know what the answer is. That's the kind of thing that I want the city staff, the finance staff, to come to us with some very specific recommendations about what would it look like if we didn't have $5 million that we were planning on even last week.
And that's the best case scenario.
The best case
if
scenario.
Students return in August. Best case scenario, $5 million deficit, $200 million budget. So we're talking roughly, what is that, 2.5%. 2.5% of the budget. Best case scenario, we're at a deficit at. So keep that in mind. That's an important metric to take from this interview. UVA's role. Has there ever been, I mean, this is a crisis. This is a global pandemic. UVA has, James Watson makes this point on the thread. UVA has billions and billions in their endowment. UVA is tied to Charlottesville. What is UVA's role here with helping the budget and helping Charlottesville from a funding and resource standpoint?
Well, of course, we have no ability to require anything from them in that respect. The question is, are there things that we could say as a matter of common interest to where, for example, supposing the university were to say, it is important to us that our employees have a place to live, that they have a place to get lunch, whatever. There may be some ways that the university could help out in that respect. Supposing the university were to say, this the big one of the complexes on West Main Street, let's say, that's all student occupied at this point, but presumably come August would not be student occupied if the university wasn't open. Maybe there's some things that the uses to which that property could be put either. I mean, for example, if things really get bad from the health standpoint, maybe that becomes a quarantine facility for people who are sick. There are some ways that they could help out. I don't think it is realistic to say to the university,
write a check,
just write us a check.
No.
If we can find some ways that they can help, I think that they could be persuaded to help, but it's got to be a sense of we're helping our people, we're helping our students, our staff, who are also Charlottesville residents, and we're all in this together.
Have we thought about this topic? Charlottesville and City Council and all of us as a community are championing and prioritizing affordable housing. The affordable housing mission, in a lot of ways, is for, say, this restaurant workforce. This restaurant workforce, in a lot of ways, are the ones that are living paycheck to paycheck and are asking for affordable housing in Charlottesville. First part of the question is, if we're making a push for affordable housing, don't we also have to make that push with the restaurant workforce now? And then the second part of the question that I have for you is, if this isn't managed the right way, and I'm not trying to hyperbolize here, if this situation is not managed the right way, the wealth gap in this community is going to get drastically larger.
Right.
Because the people who have can manage this situation. The people that are paycheck to paycheck or struggling are going to move away from Charlottesville altogether.
Well, they're going to have to go see if they can find work wherever they can find it.
Yes.
And if our economy is based on the University of Virginia students being here and 20,000 people being here, and now all of a sudden they're not.
That type of job is evaporating.
Yeah. That's going to be a problem. And
what happens there?
The simple answer is, I don't know. But it's a discussion that we need to be having. And, keep in mind that none of this was even contemplated 2 weeks ago. And maybe it should have been. Maybe we should have seen the tsunami coming over the horizon.
Right, because of China, et cetera.
Yeah, and certainly there was plenty of indication that there was a problem. Some experts were saying to us, you've got to be preparing for a very dire but undescribed scenario. We've now got enough definition so that we can at least see some of the outlines of that scenario, of the tsunami that we now see is coming. We've got a lot of thinking to do that we're just now starting to do.
We'll get to comments. Comments here. This is from Linda Bowen. Phenomenal interview.
Former planning commissioner.
Yep. Several years ago, when the city had a deficit, Cole Hendricks gathered an outside group of businessmen to go through the budget, and they were able to find $1 million in savings. Do you think that might be something council would consider now? Sometimes looking with fresh eyes is helpful. I mean, I just hope it's not a high-priced consultant.
No, I think we have plenty of good people here in Charlottesville who would be happy to exercise that kind of, to be that kind of help. And people who know a lot about budgets and operations and can ask the right questions, that might be a very good idea.
We have this topic, and this is an interesting one, and I don't want to answer for you, but I'm standing up for him in this particular topic. I think things have been moving so fast, it's difficult to get a unified front. Multiple people, Kate Elwood has put it really well. Why hasn't council done a unified front in response to COVID-19? Is it because it's just moving so fast day to day?
There are a couple of reasons for that. The first, of course, is that because we're a city manager form of government, the city manager is the chief executive, it's generally up to the city manager to be making responses. I will tell you that Teron Richardson has just been worn to a frazzle trying to deal with the administrative aspects of things. And so, for example, press releases come out of Brian Wheeler's, the communications office, that's great. But in terms of trying to say to Teron Richardson, gee, you ought to go have the kind of daily press briefing that we're seeing out of D.C. or Richmond, somebody's got to run the business, and that's what he's doing. Now, could we be doing more? Could we be doing better? Absolutely. We need to be talking about that as well. That the next logical person after the city manager is the mayor. I know that the mayor and the city manager had a little press event of some sort with NBC 29 yesterday. It frankly didn't get a lot of coverage out of NBC 29.
Got no coverage. Maybe no one saw it.
I saw it because I went looking for it.
Yeah.
But maybe they didn't say anything interesting or newsworthy. I think it would be great if we had on a regular basis, and I've suggested that they come talk to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to host.
that the long form kind of interview is the time when we can get the full explanation out. It's not just a 20-second soundbite, and we'll see. It's one of those things that's just so much in process. If you'd asked us 2 weeks ago, would this be necessary? We'd have said, oh no, come on.
Right.
But here we are.
I don't always agree. I agree with probably like 85 to 90% of everything you do. But I have huge respect for all five of you. I would not want to be in your shoes at all. I mean, what is your role as a counselor? Is your role now, is it damage control? Is it preserve the city's economy short term? Is it preserve the city's economy long term? I mean, what is
Yes, all of that.
I mean, what do you do? What's your priorities?
Yeah, and that's the issue. And we have to look at it. I mean, I guess there are two ways to look at it. The first way to look at it is in terms of what is on our plate that has to be dealt with today. And for that, the one thing that's on our plate that has to be dealt with, at least in the short term, is a budget. The first decision that has to be dealt with by April 15th is to fix the tax rate. I don't think there is much enthusiasm for raising taxes. Certainly, raising taxes in the time of an economic downturn is just the wrong way to go.
Amen, brother.
And plus, we're raising property taxes effectively by 8% just by virtue of the assessments, at a time when perhaps next year's assessments may reflect that those values are actually on the decline.
Right.
So there are a lot of reasons why that's not a good way. So I expect that by April 15th, we will put all of the same tax rates in place as they already are. I might get outvoted 4-1. I don't know, maybe 3-2, but I don't think there's any stomach on council at this point for raising the tax rates. So the next question is, okay, what do we do about the budget? Do we have to do anything about the budget for the rest of fiscal year 2019 to 2020? Answer is probably not. First of all, most of our revenue projections were running ahead. Second, we've got this $3 million rainy day fund, so to speak. So we've been told by our budget people that no, they don't see a reason why we need to start whacking and cutting for things that happened before June 30th. The real issue, like I say, is what do we do after June 30th? And that's a budget that we need to set as balanced by June 30th at the latest. We actually, although our city code requires us to have that budget done by April 15th, that we can change. We can say, okay, at least at this point, we're going to do it by June 15th or June 20th or something. The tax thing, we can't change because those tax bills have to go out in time for people to pay them in the first week of June. So that's fixed. But the expenditure side, we can continue to tweak. And we can continue to tweak it into the year itself once we begin to see what's really happening. If we get into it and we say, oh, God, the university is not reopening again. The students aren't coming back until January. Now what? What does that do to this picture, that tax picture, and so on? We have the freedom to make decisions like that after July 1 as the news, hopefully it doesn't become more dire, but if it were, we could make those changes.
Sarah Bradley says, too bad Lloyd is not the mayor. He explains things so well. Linda says this is a phenomenal,
don't get me into that.
Phenomenal interview. Bill McKenzie says, thank you, Lloyd, for being our most proactive city council member. You're getting a lot of props on people saying you explain things well. Well, folks, he does this for a living as an attorney here. Throw this.
As specifically a trial lawyer.
I know.
I've got to get 12 jurors to understand what I'm talking about.
I mean, we like to see down the road here. This is what I'm worried about. I'm worried that as a father and a businessman, this is what I'm worried about. I'm worried that the students, the longer they're away from grounds, the more likely they're not to return to grounds, and the more likely that they're going to do a curriculum online, which marginalizes the in-person experience of 20,000 people in Charlottesville's economic ecosystem. I'm also extremely nervous that 20% of the restaurants aren't going to open again. When the restaurants do open again, it's going to be in a takeout-to-go model as opposed to the dine-in model, because we can't just say, Corona's contained, the light switch is flipped, everyone feels comfortable giving high fives and chest bumps and eating elbow to elbow next to someone in a dining room. We know that's going to take a while.
Well, and in fact, we're already seeing, just in the last 24 hours, you and I are both creatures of Facebook, among other places, and I see a lot of stuff on Facebook, and a lot of people on Facebook are saying, well, there's a report out of China that there are no new cases in Hubei province. See, this is really a short-term problem. It's all going to be over in 2-3 months. Why are you all just wringing your hands so much? And the first concern is, well, okay, if we accept that, what does that lead us to? Does that lead us to well, okay, we don't have to worry about social distancing anymore.
Yeah, it starts again.
And then it starts back up again.
Right.
And so the hard question, the hard call for the public health people is going to be, let's assume we have a couple of months of some degree of social distancing into lockdown, and let's say we are able to see that the curve is declining. And at what point do we say, oh, this problem is solved, we can go back to normal? And the answer, I hope, is going to be
never.
Not right away.
It should be never.
Well, at some point we're going to say, no, you're not on. You can go back to shaking hands again. But it's probably not going to happen soon. And the interesting problem, a lot of folks have said, why don't you right away go to a complete lockdown mentality? And obviously, at one point you could say, well, okay, if we do that, then we completely wipe out economic activity.
Right.
On the other hand, every day that we delay is a day when more people are going to get sick.
And you're extending the situation.
There's actually an interesting chart about this, that one of the ones I wanted to point up, and let's see which one it is. If you go to turn to the one that says 1 day more 40%.
1 day more than 40%, Judah. He'll give us a thumbs up. It's on screen.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a delay here.
Right.
Okay.
So one of the things you see there, this is a chart that shows what happens if you delay by 1 day, how much social distancing you require. And if you look on the chart, there's both a green line for social distancing, and then you see the red line. What happens if you delay by 1 day and you get 40% more cases? Now, that's a reason to not delay. On the other hand, you've also got the practical problem of people are going to say, nobody's sick. What's the problem? Why are you making me do this?
And how about the fact that most small businesses have to do this? Interact in person.
Yeah. And, in our law office, there are a lot of things we can do by email, but every now and then we actually have to look somebody in the eye and talk to them.
Right.
And it's going to be hard for this trial lawyer, for example, to charge much in the way of fees if I can't ever go to trial.
Exactly.
And so the courts are closed now and be closed for at least another week, probably 2, 3, 4 weeks. So so it's a problem for all of us, and it's a trade-off. And the hard thing for the public health people is to figure out when to make that call. So just as the chart shows, where 1 day can make a difference of 40% in the number of cases as the exponential growth continues, how soon do we make that call? That's fortunately for me, that's not my job. Unfortunately for me, that's not my job. I can't make the call even if I wanted to. It's got to come from the governor. It's got to come from the public health authorities, CDC, NIH, wherever. And I'm hoping that they have fully appreciated all of these problems, and whatever call that they're going to make, that they make it, and that it's a call that makes sense for all of us.
Shelley Murphy makes this comment on the stream. City closures also impact the surrounding counties. Lots of city workers do not live in the city. Has there been any type of discussions with the counties? To Shelley's point, more than 70% of the people who work for Charlottesville City do not live in the city of Charlottesville.
Can't afford to.
What is the relationship? We talk about affordable housing, and this is the ADD kicking in here. We talk about affordable housing. You do a pandemic at a community like Charlottesville, or you do a pandemic in America, that'll create affordable housing. That's going to drive,
well,
and
right.
I hope to God that never happens. Yeah. Shelley Murphy says, what's the role with you guys in the counties?
Well, at this point, we are planning together with the city administration, and the county administration are planning together in the same emergency office. We are not actually involved in planning with the university at this point. I can't tell you why, but that just hasn't happened. So I don't know that anybody has been talking about the kind of global economic issue that Shelley raises there, as to, for example, what the effect is going to be on communities in Fluvanna or Louisa or Buckingham. I've always said...
What's your projection? I have projections. We're just two guys on a talk show spitballing.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? What do you think?
I choose to believe, and emphasize belief is what you think in the absence of proof, I choose to believe that we will reopen the university in August, that people will come back, that things will be slow because we will probably not have football in the fall, but that for the most part, because we will have done such a good job at the social distancing and flattening the curve and so on, and more importantly, because we now, we will have in 3 months, we will have a $1 test. And one of the things that South Korea found as an important part of how they were able to flatten their curve was to test a lot. And they have tested a whole lot more than anybody else. That's how they found, for example, that they were having such a problem with their young people. And so once they got the young people to self-quarantine, that really helped them knock things down. So the fact is there'll be a test that we can hopefully get to where we're not having the problem that Italy is having. Remember that the problem with Italy is not merely that they have a lot of cases. It is specifically that they have a lot of cases that are more than the capacity of the health department to handle.
Right.
And there's another chart here we've got called Flatten the Curve, if you can pull that one up, and we can just talk a little bit about that. The important point is the healthcare capacity, and your guest yesterday talked about that, and that's
She's watching, by the way.
That's the notion that we only have a finite number of hospital beds, of ICU beds, of ventilators, of people who can handle, or the ability to handle people who get really, really sick. Best reports indicate that the number of people who get a coronavirus who end up needing serious critical intensive care intervention is about 4 to 5%. So do we have 4 to 5%? Do we have enough hospital beds, ICU beds to do that? We only have enough if the number of people getting infected is low enough, and that's why the flattening the curve becomes so important. If we look at this particular chart, it shows the red bump is what happens if precautions are not taken. The orangey bump is what happens if you have social distancing. If the social distancing is sufficiently effective so the number of new cases is still below the healthcare capacity, then we can handle that. That's no longer a public health crisis. What we're seeing in Italy is that they let the number of cases get too large, too fast, and too many cases above their healthcare capacity. If you really want to get scared about this, the other chart that's relevant is the chart that compares us to Italy, or just says Italy versus U.S. If you can pull that one up. And this is
screen.
This is a chart that's about 4 days old, or the data is about 4 days old, but you can see that as of the time this chart was prepared, there are 3,700 cases in the United States. At the same time, relatively speaking, Italy was at 3,800. Mind you, Italy is having like 500 people a day dying right now. If we updated that chart through today, what we would see is that the number of cases today, we reported about 9,500 or 9,600, is comparable to Italy's 9,172. We're having about a 26% a day growth in the number of reported cases. And so that's a number that basically doubles every 3 days.
It's terrifying.
And quadruples every 6 days. And all we can do is to hope at this point, because we don't have a cure, we don't have a prevention. The only prevention is social distancing at this point. And that's going to be about a 2-week lag time before we look at the number of cases being reported. So we won't know for 2 weeks how successful we're being right now. Things will get worse in the next 2 weeks. And people are going to look at city councilors and other governmental officials and say, do something. And our answer is going to be, we tried to do it 2 weeks ago. Did you listen? Did you social distance? Did you quarantine yourself? Did you take those steps? That's, just like the saying goes, the best time to plant a tree is 21 years ago. Or, the best time to cure this problem was 2 weeks ago.
Chris Turner says he's watching in Belmont. Jerry, I've watched the last 50 minutes of this interview. Please give Lloyd a thank you for explaining this so clearly. I've learned more in the last 55 minutes than I have from any media outlet in Charlottesville. Andrew Sneatherin, the attorney, welcome to the program.
And soon to be judge, by the way.
Soon to be judge, yes. Gerard Smith ran for Board of Supervisors. Welcome to the show. You have, I think, every media outlet besides the Charlottesville Tomorrow website watching you here. Why don't we close with this frank, real conversation? We got the firefighters watching. We got the teachers watching. We got the restaurant owners watching. We got the hotel management watching. We got the folks that want the bike lanes watching. The folks that want West Main streetscape done well. We got Jim Ryan's staff watching. You got the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors, at least a portion of them watching right now. What do we, last one, anywhere you want to go. What should we expect from the community over the next 12 months, almost a State of the Union? Economy, quality of life, moms going back to the playground with their kid, and UVA.
Well, I guess I would start off by saying, again, it all depends on, are we talking about a 2 or 3 to 4 month problem, or are we talking about a 12-month problem? I hope that we're in a 3-month kind of a problem. I hope that by the middle of the summer we will be able to see, and mind you, there's been a lot of prediction, including from Donald Trump and others, that because the flu season tends to wane in about April, that somehow this is all going to go away in April. I don't think that's the case. Most authorities say it's not the case for this particular virus, but it's probably likely that there will be some natural waning of it simply because we're spending less time indoors, we're spending less time confined with one another, and so on. The real issue is, are we going to see what happened in 1918 or 1919 when the so-called Spanish flu came roaring back in the fall after people had kind of gotten lazy about it over the summer? And some public health people are saying we can anticipate that there is enough likelihood of that happening that we shouldn't be going back to normal at least until, say, Christmas time, at least until we know whether it's coming back, whether it's really been tamped down. I don't know the answer. We'll have to see and get hopefully more accurate information by July. But my hope is, and the plan that I want to make sure we have in place, is a plan that says, let's figure we're going to get back in business on a limited basis in Charlottesville in August, that the university will open. Again, perhaps we don't have a football season, but that we are trying to do sort of a minimal social distancing kind of a situation as we get back to the beginning of communal life again. The one thing I will absolutely say, I will say this to the firefighters and other people as well, and we've been hearing a lot of people with needs, financial needs, and I know the firefighters are tired of hearing this, to say, oh, don't worry, we'll figure it all out, just hold on another year. One of the things that I have said repeatedly during the budget season, and I'm new to this, I've only been sitting in the chair for about 10 weeks, 11 weeks, there are a lot of things that people want to bring in during the budget season, and that's the wrong time to make program initiatives. If we're going to have a fully, some different model of how the firefighters are going to get staffed and funded, let's have that discussion, but not as a part of this budget, and particularly not now that we see we're looking to cut. On the other hand, it is entirely possible that we're going to find that the firefighters are doing so much medic work that their overtime budgets are going to go haywire, and we may have to make some accommodations for that later on down the road. So I don't mean to dismiss completely out of hand the need that the firefighters and teachers and others have for more money and more staff and so on. It's just that right now, and we're on council, recognizing, of course, that counselors are supposed to be part-time job.
Yeah.
We're spending a lot of time trying to just get our minds wrapped around epidemiology. That's not something they taught in law school. It's not something we talked about during the campaign. You know, they say that when you're running for office, you can talk all you want about your priorities, but nature has a way of taking over.
Well, a
And
perfect
that's the
example of
situation
this
here.
is, and close on this, a perfect example of this, you ran on a platform and in a voting environment that was that was recovery and post August 12th, 2017, in a voting and environment that was prioritizing affordable housing. That was the gist.
Right.
And now your legacy on council is how you guys manage the coronavirus.
And what I really hope we can do is that to whatever set of accommodations we make, whatever agreements we come to, whatever solutions we come to, that they not be at the expense of diversity, equity, inclusion, and those other things that have been an important part of our public discussion for the last 2 years.
Well, unfortunately, I think that's going to happen, though,
Well,
to a certain extent.
and part of our job as counselors is to stop it from happening.
Touché.
Part of our job as counselors is to make sure that we don't end up sacrificing. This is not a situation of last in, first out. The most recent budget initiatives are the first to go. We've had done a lot of things in the last couple of years that should have been done a long time ago, and I don't want to have anybody thinking, oh, well, the easy path to balancing the budget is just to cut out the initiatives that we've taken in the last few years.
Right.
We've got to figure out a way to integrate all of that into one budget, one lasting budget, and that's going to take a lot of understanding and forgiveness, frankly, that hasn't always been in a lot of supply.
I respect that, but does affordable housing matter if the economy is in shambles?
It's a question of who is sleeping on the streets. Are they sleeping on the streets because we're not supporting affordable housing? Let's face it, nobody's going to sit there and say, that house right there is presently occupied, let's go put 4 homeless people in there and we're not going to pay anybody. That's not going to happen. So yes, we still do have to worry about affordable housing. Whether we worry about it in the same way, on the same timetable, that's one of the problems. See, we've got a lot of funds that have been set aside for a lot of purposes that, and I'll just use the sidewalks and the trails and bike trails and so on as an example. There's money there we haven't spent. We can spend that, and part of what the budget issue this year was all about was we're not going to put more money, at a time when things are tight generally, we're not going to put more money into a fund that still has money in it that isn't going to get spent in this fiscal year. And so we've got to look at what those funds are and whether there are places that we can be making.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
You're talking about money, managing the money.
Yeah. And so there are a lot of choices we've got to make. And we've got to make it not only with the money in mind, but also the sociology of the city in mind.
Yeah, if you have a rainy day fund for your roof and the HVAC goes out in the middle of summer, you repair the HVAC unit because your 2-year-old's sweating upstairs.
Right.
And you pull it from the roof fund.
That's a good example.
Yeah. But
we don't forget.
Right. You go back to replenishing the roof fund.
Right.
Yeah, you are A-plus people. Seriously, I will speak. I don't want to speak for all these people, but one of the common things that keeps coming up here is your clarity of thought, how you explain things, and thank you for giving us time because the citizens are chomping at the bit just to hear. I'm sure you heard that.
Oh yeah. And I get a lot of emails, particularly to the council website. I'll just tell people, if you want to reach city council, the email is simply council@charlottesville.org, and it goes to all the councilors, and it goes to the city manager and the top leadership, all the department heads, and so on. So that's the best way if you want to reach out to your city government, council@charlottesville.org. Getting a lot of emails about this, and a lot of it has been, why won't you come, why doesn't the city explain this? And we've tried to give those explanations. I've tried to give them as best I can individually, and I know that there have been efforts before with the city manager and the mayor and others, but we'll keep trying.
Well, thank you. For the folks that are asking, we will archive the show on ilovecville.com. We'll syndicate it for 2 weeks across our network, 17 Facebook pages, 17 Twitter accounts. We have the 3rd largest Instagram community in the area, an e-newsletter that goes out to over 130,000 inboxes every morning at 11 a.m., and of course, the podcast on iTunes and on ilovecville.com. Give Lloyd Snook some props. He just gave us 65 minutes and offered a lot of insight and clarity. Thank him. Thank him for his efforts. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. And right now, Charlottesville city councilors are essentially a quarterback playing the biggest stage, and we're the Monday morning quarterbacks analyzing what they're doing, but they are in a tough spot. We will have the real estate perspective of this coronavirus on this network tomorrow with a bunch of folks that are associated with CAR, Charlottesville Albemarle Association of Realtors. So we're going to talk real estate and the coronavirus tomorrow on the I Love CVille network. Guys, enjoy the afternoon and stay safe. Stay away from each other. Social distance. We're 6 feet. We're 6 feet. Have a good afternoon, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
You were great. You were fantastic. If you wanted to use the platform in that capacity in any way, let me know. Happy to do it.